Our next guest is Donald McNeil Jr., who joins us to discuss what you actually need to know about the monkeypox outbreak. He's reported on epidemics for decades, and last year won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service for his COVID reporting in the New York Times. Donald, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. It was actually the Times that won it. My reporting was part of it, but anyway.
Well, we celebrate you both. We wanted to ask you what you make of the government's response to monkeypox so far. The CDC and the FDA, there's been some criticism of how the vaccine rollout, again, the FDA had to inspect a factory. That took longer than was desired. And it sounds like, but I'm curious for your take on it, it sounds like we're repeating some of the COVID pandemic mistakes, which is very frustrating given we'd just gone through it. You would have expected a kind of faster turnaround on some of these things, but what do you make of it?
I'm trying hard not to compare this to COVID or saying it's similar to it, or exactly to AIDS, or exactly to every pandemic is different. I mean, look, whether or not the government is having a competent response, an incompetent response, or an amazing response depends completely on your perspective on this. I mean, here we are starting an epidemic for which we actually have a vaccine and we actually have a treatment. And that's amazing. And it's because of the foresight of the United States government, which started ordering this vaccine back in the mid-2000s when they were worried about a smallpox attack, basically because of Saddam Hussein and the rumor that he had weaponized smallpox. So at one point, we had 28 million doses of this vaccine, but they were in bulk frozen form and they eventually expired. And now, back when I started writing about this, I tried to get an answer as to how many doses do we really have? Because the CDC was saying 1,000 to 2,000. The company was saying, well, we made 28 million. And when I called the Strategic National Stockpile, they said, we can't tell you because it's a state secret, because it's a bioterrorism alternative. Now we're finally getting answers. It looks like there were somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million doses of this vaccine sitting in frozen form in Denmark, which is being put into fill and finish category so that it can actually be used here. I think we've got about 300,000 doses in the country by now. How many do we need? Nobody really knows. I mean, the best guess is that if you wanted to try to get all of the gay men who are at risk right now in this country, you would use the figure for how many people might need to be on PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV, and that's around 3 to 4 million. So we don't have enough vaccine. But the fact that we have a vaccine and the fact that we have a treatment, which is pretty good, tecovirimat, TPOXX, means that we're way, way, way ahead of the curve compared to where we've been in all other pandemics. I mean, it took us a year to have a vaccine for COVID, for example, because we had to start from scratch. This one is actually, it's in the freezers. But unfortunately, nobody knew at this moment that monkeypox would suddenly break out of Nigeria, arrive in Europe, and then get into a specific high-risk sexual network, which is not just men who have sex with men in general, but men who go to things like the International Leather Conference or the Darklands Festival, or, you know, places where there's a great deal of anonymous sex. And that's when a new disease gets into a network like that, you've got a wildfire going on.
Well, and that brings us to my next question. So we're trying to understand exactly how at risk a general population would be, or if this is going to move out of the community it's currently in, because it's certainly the case that so far, 98% plus of infections are among this group of men who have sex with men or who have attended events like the ones you mentioned. But when I read about like the mechanism of transmission, it doesn't sound like it is a strictly sexually transmitted disease, that you could acquire it perhaps, or push back on me if I'm wrong here, by being around or being exposed towards someone, or maybe having shared towels or something like that. But so far we have not seen like very much of that at all. Is there a risk that in the future this is not going to be just in this community? What do you think?
Okay, the answer is we don't know yet. And so by general population, I assume you mean heterosexual population. It's not even, I would say that not the entire gay male population is at risk yet. It's more the guys who are inside the networks that have lots of anonymous sex. And that's not everyone. But this disease transmits sort of the way herpes does, through blister contact as part of sexual contact. So if you look at herpes in the general population, you're looking at 20% of all sexually active people have had it at one time in their lives, and women have a tendency to have it more than men. So we're somewhere likely to be somewhere between HIV, which is almost entirely in the gay male population in this country, but in fact in the world, 53% of all the people with HIV are women and girls. So yeah, it could presumably get out of this network. It depends on vaccination speed. It depends on people's behavior. And it depends on what a good job we do of getting the word out and whether people are worried. Right now, there's panic. I mean, there was a poll by the University of Pennsylvania that said 1 out of 5 Americans is worried about getting monkeypox, and right now that's absurd. But it's what happens at the beginning of every pandemic. There's indifference, and then there's sort of oh, monkeypox, what's that? And you have to have sex with monkeys, or people get ridiculous in the beginning, and then they begin to say, oh, okay, it's in gay men. Well, that's fine. I'm safe because I'm not at risk for AIDS. And then as soon as they begin to hear, well, it actually may get out of that network, then they begin to think, oh my God, am I at risk? Is my daughter in college at risk? And the answer is we don't know yet. I mean, right now, 97, 98, 99% of all cases are in men who have sex with men. There have been some nurses infected. There have been some babies infected. There is clearly some transmission. We don't know if it's kissing. We don't know if it's possibly breath from people who have active sores in their mouths at that moment. I mean, we knew that was the case with smallpox. So we're really pretty fuzzy on everything but the fact that this is sexually transmitted by the close contact you have during sex, particularly between sores and mucous membranes, which is different from something which is in semen. It's touching, which makes it a little bit like herpes.
Donald, in your piece for Common Sense, you are scathing about people who refuse to cancel these big sex-positive parties, as well as, people who, out of what I would call kind of woke desire not to offend, have been hesitant to talk about which population specifically is at risk. And you end your piece by talking about how this could actually fuel a backlash against the gay community in the worst case scenario. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I think that thing where, a kind of censorious attempt to protect people's feelings ends up actually harming those people more is something that's quite prevalent in our culture right now.
Okay, yes. Was I censorious? Sure. What I was really saying was, look, I'm not saying cancel the parties. I'm saying delay the parties. The summer of Pride was not a good time to have a monkeypox epidemic. If we could only, look, there are producers of these parties, like the owners of the bathhouses back in the 1980s. They make a lot of money out of these parties. It's $50 at the door. You pay for drinks and stuff. You're basically encouraging men to have sex with each other and to dance and to have fun, to hang out, in return for making a profit. If those parties could have been held off until September or October, we could have vaccinated many more men. By that time, we might have a rapid test you could give at the door, because right now you have to swab a pustule and then send it off to the CDC or another testing laboratory. So we don't have a rapid test you can give at the door. It might be possible to make parties safe. So I'm arguing, look, just hang on. Nobody's saying you have to give up sex for the rest of your life. Just slow down on the parties until September or October, when people can get vaccinated, and then let the good times roll again. There isn't any discussion of this. It's as if, particularly by the New York City Health Department, seems to have the attitude that no, we're sex positive, and we want to absolutely encourage men to go out and have sex and put a Band-Aid over your lesions. That is totally irresponsible advice. I mean, no, that is not protective. It's not protecting the other person. And from my point of view, it's not the responsibility of a health agency to be sex positive in the middle of a sexually transmitted epidemic, any more than it's, you should be sneeze positive or cough positive during the Spanish flu. Your idea is to be infection negative if you're a health official, and you kind of have to bite the bullet. Too many health officials, I think, want to be liked. They're doctors, most of them. They were brought up to have a good bedside manner. They don't really understand their position is more like that of a military general. Your job is to save the entire army, not to be the most liked guy in the place. And so if you have to ask some people to fight a suicidal rearguard action in order to save your entire army, you do that sometimes. You have to sometimes be tough and say people need to, control themselves. In this case, nobody's threatening to lock you up in quarantine camps as Cuba did. Nobody's threatening to, nobody's marching in and canceling the parties. Basically, it's a request, please hold off on the parties for a couple of months until they're safe. You don't want men to suffer, and there's a lot of unnecessary suffering going on right now.
Well, it's especially kind of hypocritical given, the ease and the duration with which health officials, including in New York, shuttered things during the COVID pandemic, including the parks, outdoor public spaces closed for some length of time, even well beyond the point at which there was broad public knowledge and knowledge among experts that outside was a relatively extremely safe environment from the spread of COVID.
You're rewriting history a little bit there. They didn't shut the parks in New York City. They did in Los Angeles. There was some overreaction, but none of that was an easy decision. There was a real struggle back in February, March of 2020. Do we cancel the St. Patrick's Day parade? Do we cancel Comic-Con? Do we cancel March Madness? Do we cancel all these things? Every one of them had a struggle. So I don't think people are that casual about it, but this time I really think they ought to. In fact, I think to the point where the city health department might actually go to the producers of parties and say, "Look, cancel your party, and we'll reimburse you for your expenses." I mean, it is not unreasonable to pay the costs of stopping a disease when you're asking somebody to take a big financial hit. I mean, this is sort of a grotesque analogy, but when we ask farmers to wipe out their entire chicken flock or turkey flock to stop avian flu or something, or if we ask them to kill all their cattle in order to stop something like foot and mouth disease, we pay them for that. And I don't think that's unreasonable. I think you ought to, there is a greater good here. So I just think people need to make better decisions now.
And I mean, what would you say to the kind of counter argument that, these are individual decisions. People understand the risk now that they're taking, and adults should make these decisions for themselves and, let the chips fall where they may.
People don't always understand the risk that they're getting into when they get into a sexual relationship with somebody else. I mean, everybody knows men lie. Every woman knows that. Every man who's had sex with men knows that. People don't like to announce the fact that they have lesions. So no, I don't consider it completely we're all grown-ups here and we're all on equal footing. If there were tests at the door, if you were told you are going to be tested or you're going to be inspected at the door, I bet a whole lot of people who were coming to that party might decide not to come to the party because they realize they might get caught. So no, I really don't believe that people are going into this with completely open eyes. Unfortunately, a lot of people, unlike us, don't read the news, don't pay attention. They turn on, music or sports or whatever when they come home. They're not really paying attention. They don't know they're at risk. And I think you have to move to protect people like that.
And let me just ask you one more quick question about children specifically. There was a case last week where 2 children had monkeypox, and in the right-wing media sphere, there was a lot of sort of outrage along the lines of, well, isn't it safe to assume these children have been sexually molested, right? Because how else would they have gotten that? How should we be thinking about children? God forbid, hopefully no children will get this, but if God forbid any children do end up with this, how should we think about that going forward?
No, I do not think that children. I mean, I don't know what happened in those cases, but I think it's not necessarily likely that the majority of cases in Africa have been of children. They were probably, the index case in each case was probably bitten by a rodent. We don't know how this is transmitted, but we do know that, like smallpox, the smallpox is transmitted in close contact with breath, in droplets. So it's possible, one couple that had a baby was literally just passing through the United States, and there's very little information about that couple at all, whether they came from Nigeria, whether they came from Portugal, whether they came from Antarctica. And the other one, I gather, was an American baby. Perhaps that was a child of someone who got monkeypox and they transmitted to the child. It does not necessarily mean that it was sexually transmitted to the child. Okay. There are other ways of transmitting diseases like this.
Well, Donald McNeil, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting
me. Thank you so much.
All right. Nice to talk to you.
We'll have more Rising in just a minute.